So good morning, everyone. I'm Brett Whitehunt, University Librarian, and it's my pleasure to introduce this morning's speaker. The University of Regina Students' Union, URSU, and the library have been working collaboratively in recent years to reduce the burden of textbook costs on students. The URSU Textbooks for All initiative, through which textbooks are made available on the library reserve desk for borrowing, is in its second year and is a heavily used service that has helped many students reduce the costs associated with post-secondary education. Today's visit by Dr. Jangiani is another example of collaboration between URSU and the library, who have worked together with additional financial support from the Associate Vice President of Academic Research, who is unfortunately leaving the university, to bring him to campus today. We envision open educational resources, including open textbooks, as another important tool in increasing the affordability and accessibility of university education, as well as making discovery and learning open to all. Dr. Rajiv Jangiani is the University Teaching Fellow in Open Studies and a faculty member in the Department of Psychology at Kwantlen Polytechnic University. He is also currently serves as Senior Open Education Research and Advocacy Fellow with BC Campus, an Associate Editor of Psychology, Learning and Teaching, and an Ambassador for the Center for Open Science. Over the past several years, Dr. Jangiani has participated in the development of open textbooks and open educational resources for BC Campus. And you can learn more about him and his work on his website, thatsiteprof.com. Dr. Jangiani's presentation this morning is titled Serving Social Justice and Pedagogical Innovation with Open Educational Practices. And he asks that you reserve your questions until the end of the presentation. I also should mention that he's agreed to have this recorded, so the questions will be recorded as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So first I should say thank you for showing up. I know that this may be an area that some of you work a lot more in. If you're, for example, a copyright officer, you will encounter questions concerning which may be dealing in open ed resources more than most others. Or if you're an instructional designer, you might be interested in the flexibility of the permissions that come with open ed resources. But if you're a faculty member and you're learning about this for the first time, or a faculty author who's been working in this space for a little while, again, thank you for taking the time to come. You'll note that the title of my talk focuses not just on open ed resources, but open educational practices. And that's certainly how I hope to talk about things. I should say this is my first trip to Saskatchewan, my first proper trip to Saskatchewan, because I don't really count the one time I was flying through on Via Rail and I was just staring at the countryside. But if you will permit me, I would like to begin with just a bit of a personal story, just so you understand where I'm coming from over here. So, I grew up in a small town of about 25 million people in India called Bombay. It's a very interesting place to grow up. And growing up, I actually enjoyed a fair degree of privilege. But privilege, as you may know, is a funny thing. You don't really realize you have it until you lose it, at least in part. And that's what happened. As I was growing up, family suffered a series of financial setbacks. My father died. We lost our home. And so suddenly the future that was very, very certain for me became very, very bleak. And so that's when my grandparents took me in. So this is still in India. And it was my grandparents, my maternal grandparents, that really decided to invest in my future. So a few years later, when I decided I wanted to travel abroad to pursue a post-secondary education in this country, they supported my decision. So my grandfather paid for my airfare, he paid for my tuition, even those early years when I was still an international student. So when I say tuition, it's, tuition. But, I was here on an international student visa. And you may be aware as well that international students have all sorts of visa restrictions. So as much as I wanted to find work to be able to pay for at least some of my tuition, I couldn't work off campus. There were very few jobs on campus. And it was about a year and a half before I managed to get one of those few jobs on campus. But by then I was a domestic student. But still, it was a happy time. And so this is about, almost 18, 19 years ago. And that's when my grandparents came to visit me. This was just after I'd got my job. I'd become a landed immigrant at that point. And they came to visit with me in Vancouver. It was the summer, it was beautiful weather, and they spent about 3 weeks with me. And I remember this time very fondly because, well, they were very important to me, obviously. After they spent 3 weeks with me, they decided to go on to the United States, where my grandfather's brother still lives in Massachusetts. But they cut short that trip because my grandmother decided she wanted to go home early. So they did. They flew back to India. 7 days after landing, my grandmother passed away. 10 days after that, my grandfather passed away. And this may not be that surprising of a story, especially when this is a couple that were married for more than 50 years. Of course, it's not that unusual for that to happen. But it is bittersweet for me because while this is a sad story, it's also, I think very few people get a chance to experience that degree of closure with someone who's that important to them. But also, I want you to appreciate when I first came over here, just how motivated I was to do well. Because I knew that every single semester that I hit the dean's list, those letters of commendation would be sent back to my grandfather in India. Right? And I also know that without my grandfather's support, I wouldn't have moved to Canada. I would not have become a Canadian citizen. I certainly would not have moved to the other side of the lectern, and I wouldn't be in Saskatchewan today. Right? And I'm saying all of this because I really do believe that higher education is a vehicle for economic and social mobility. And when I say this, again, it's not a theoretical construct for me, it's very much my lived experience. Yet the more I examine the structure of higher education itself, the more I see that it's actually structured in a way that replicates and that reinforces existing power structures. There's many illustrations of this. But I want you to consider this. Few people realize that there's actually language embedded within the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights concerning the importance of equal access to higher education. This is Article 26, by the way. But I think even when people learn about this, our minds immediately go to the third world, or to places like where I grew up, where there's too many students, not enough seats, or insufficient infrastructure, perhaps. But this applies here in Canada. This applies here at the University of Regina. Take a look at this. This is off your website. The cost of attendance at the U of R right now. And depending on where you choose to, I guess, depending on what program you're enrolled in, and I guess the kind of food you want to buy, if you want to survive purely on ramen or something else, that's about the cost of attendance, according to your own website right now. And if you hail from a wealthy family, that's fantastic. That's Plan A for you. But let's assume that's not Plan A, because for most of us, that's not Plan A. Plan B, of course, is working. And an increasing number of our students are working not just part-time but full-time as they're attempting to earn a degree. So here's a little thought experiment for you. If this is what it costs to attend 1 year at the U of R right now, living in residence, this is what it would take. So $10.96, I think, is your new minimum wage. It would take somewhere in the neighborhood of 1858 to 2250 hours at minimum wage to pay for 1 year of schooling at the University of Regina right now, and that's somewhere in the region of a full-time job. So I'm saying this because this is the reality. This is very much the reality of students today. If it's not entirely that, it's certainly in part. So there are simply not enough hours in the day, in the week, to be able to pay for a year's study here or anywhere else for that matter. It's quite different than it's been before. Students in this province and many others are working at levels they have never worked before. So if any of us are entering this discussion thinking, well, I went to school and I worked at the same time, it's never been like this. It's never been as bad as it is today. So this is Plan C. Yes. So if your Plan A is just be wealthy, Plan B is work, Plan C, student loans. And at this point, about 50% of Canadian undergraduates require a student loan simply to be in the classroom. Average debt in this country is very close to $30,000. That's just average at this point. And 5 years after having graduated, barely a third of our students manage to pay off their debt. 5 years. We also know that when student debt goes from $1,000 to $10,000, program completion rates plummet from 59% to 8%. That is the reality. This is something I'll never forget. This was my alma mater, the University of British Columbia. A few years ago, had a marketing campaign. They wanted to celebrate their graduates. So around convocation, they put these posters on campus, and they give the graduating students these markers. They said, fill in your most memorable experience. That's not what they were hoping was going to happen. But this is the picture that went viral.
Sorry, I couldn't read what it said.
Oh, it says, I will always remember UBC 4, and the student wrote in, my crippling debt. Not what they were hoping. But as we're talking about this, I want to just also try to emphasize, we're not just talking about the financial implications of this debt. We all have student wellness programs on our campuses, so I want you to ask yourself, what is the impact on mental health of this kind of debt? What is the impact on the delaying of life milestones, on getting married, on buying a home, for example, on having children, if that's what people want to do, right? This is a survey of more than 18,000 students from 36 universities from 2 years ago, giving you a sense of the impact of student debt on future plans of graduating students in this country. Right from, it discourages me from taking further education, to I need more education to earn enough to repay my debt, which is an interesting. And so, as a faculty member, I can tell you, this is my experience, and I think it's probably yours as well. But at the start of every semester, in fact maybe 2 weeks before the semester begins, this is why I receive emails from students. Right? So, hey prof, do I really need the book? May I use an older edition? This is a very, very common email. And this is what's lurking behind those emails. Food insecurity. So, at UBC, the food bank has seen a 100% increase in the use by its students over the last 2 years. This is not just UBC. You see this in Ontario. Same thing happening over there. This is happening in Alberta. Same thing happening over there. And I haven't looked yet, but I'll bet you the same thing is happening over here. Because there's a real parallel for students between tuition, for example, and rent. So students can't easily say, I'm not going to pay tuition. But they can say, I'm not going to buy those textbooks. Students can't say, I'm not going to pay my rent. They can say, I'm going to starve myself for the next couple of days. That's exactly what we're saying. So if you're interested in this, I'm not going to talk about this too much more, but this is an excellent report that really lays bare the problem of food insecurity on our campuses right now. This was published about a year ago, Hunger on Campus. So in the midst of all of this, I'm talking about unaffordability more broadly, and there's many pieces that go into that, of course. Tuition, cost of living, transport. But as an individual faculty member, I have no control over those things. Right? So there's two reasons why I'm focusing on required course materials. One is just that, right? I have control. This is not the biggest piece of the puzzle, but there's in fact no other person who has control over the cost of required course materials other than faculty, right? That's the whole point of academic freedom. It's not the only point, that's one of them. Nobody can tell me what to assign for my classes. But the other is that there's actually no other consumer good, period, that's gone up, that's risen in cost as much as commercial textbooks have. They've gone up by more than 1,000% since 1977. It's always been between 3 and 4 times the pace of inflation. Even more than healthcare, nothing has gone up more than commercial textbook costs, absolutely nothing. And so now, in fact, we live in the era of the $400 textbook. So here's one example. It's not an isolated example, in case you're wondering. I'll throw up another example, although I think I'm picking on one particular publisher this morning. But really, again, at my institution, I work at Kwantlen Polytechnic University, which is a public undergraduate university, about 20,000 students, open admissions policy, right? Very high proportion of ethnic minority students, first-generation university students. This is where the magic of an open admissions institution takes place. At my institution, tuition for a 3-credit course is $400. A textbook can be $400. Right? There's really only one reaction to a situation where you've got a $400 textbook. And I think this is the reaction, actually. I love that reaction. I know. But this is here. Not at Regina, but certainly in Saskatchewan. This is why students across the country have launched textbook broke social media campaigns. So you'll see the hashtag textbook broke BC, textbook broke AB, and now textbook broke SK. This student up at the University of Saskatchewan is noting that they just spent $750 on textbooks for that semester. I'd rather spend my money on food. Precisely. Exactly. So, as a faculty member, again, this is what I do. Right? This is what we all do. So you give them the syllabus, these are the books that are required, and unfortunately we have a principal-agent problem where we are the ones who assign the resources, we are not the ones who pay for those resources. And so about a third of faculty have no idea what the precise cost is of the books that they've assigned. That's just a principal-agent problem right there. So when students look at this, of course, they say, fine, let me see what I can do. They'll say, I'll buy a used book if I can, if there's not a new edition that's come out just before the semester has begun. Or, at the very least, I'll resell my book at the end of the semester and recover some of that money, if I can, because as we all know, if there's a new edition that's come out midway through the semester, your $200 textbook is now worth $10. They buy it online, of course, they'll rent, shared purchases, all of these things. Interlibrary loans are an interesting thing. I encountered a couple of students who, in pairs, were daisy-chaining interlibrary loans of a textbook because their institution would not waste an enormous amount of money on textbooks that change edition every couple of years. Photocopying, I used to photocopy books. Some realized that you can purchase international editions, which are sort of 85% the same book, but for a fraction of the cost. And then the older edition thing. And I always warn, we all warn our students against purchasing older editions. We say, I can't stop you from doing it, but please know you're going to be assessed based on the most recent version. You're responsible for the mismatch in content, standard sort of warnings, right? They know they're taking an academic risk. If the pagination has changed, for example, if they put new photographs on the pages. I'm talking about introductory psychology, when I really don't need a new description of classical conditioning every 3 years. I don't. Maybe I feel the same way. It's a bit much. And sometimes when they're using older editions, I have to say, I can't argue with them. This is a real student at the University of Minnesota who was assigned an $85 French textbook. They went to Amazon and they bought not just the previous edition, but in the edition there was 2 editions previous, for $8. This was their rationale. Can we really argue with them? No, I mean maybe if you're a scholar of French, you'll say, no. But at the same time, what if there's a homework solution platform that's tied to the book that's only available with the new book, for example? These are the sorts of barriers that we're navigating now. In increasing numbers, our students are illegally downloading the books as well. Here's a screenshot of an illegal torrent site where a student has taken the trouble of actually scanning and uploading an entire Pearson financial accounting book. And this is an interesting example because a couple of us were talking about an open ed resource project for this topic. But look at this message. This is from the student who's broken the law, risking prosecution by uploading content. Penn State, you are gouging your students. We'd be willing to pay a fair price for this book, but that'd be far south of the $200 you charge at the bookstore. Fix this, lower the tuition a bit, and maybe students like me won't spend several days scanning your materials and putting it online. Also clean the bathrooms on the first floor. I love it. It's like a catch-all for all the complaints. But again, this is the system that students, this is preferable. Right? And then of course there's this. There's an especially dark corner of the internet called ratemyprofessor.com. I didn't make this up. This is a real profile that exists for Master Yoda, who apparently teaches at the American University. You can see he's very helpful, but not particularly clear. No chili peppers for Yoda. But this is an example of a site where students have been using tags for a long time. One of the tags they use is requires a textbook. Another tag they use is actually uses the assigned textbook. Because there's little that's more frustrating for students than being in this situation. They spend the $200, they buy the book, and they find out 3 months in that, well, they only needed a couple of chapters, right? As faculty, we can make things better, we can make things worse. This is one of the ways in which we can make things worse, right? I've actually worked with faculty who feel so guilty about the cost of textbooks once they realize what it is, that they make sure that they assign every single chapter, which they didn't need to do, but they're assigning sort of information reading overload out of guilt, which is a really, really peculiar pedagogical approach. Anyway, this is the best data we have. This comes from BC, a survey of across 22 different post-secondary institutions. A majority of our students in BC are now not buying at least some of their required course resources because of cost. That's how that sentence ends. Substantial number earning a poor grade, again, often because they're going with an older edition, they're not buying the homework platform or something else. Some of them, about a quarter, just over, are taking fewer courses or not registering for a specific section based on textbook costs. And a number of them are also dropping or withdrawing from a course because of textbook costs. Like, this is really interesting. And if you're an academic administrator, for example, this should be very, very concerning to you. And this is the new frontier in the battle for textbook affordability. As I said, increasingly faculty are getting accustomed to working with online homework solution platforms that automate the grading, that are sort of adaptive quizzing and so on. I can understand the pressures that lead faculty to this, that attract faculty to this. Right? At the same time, this is the new frontier, because now students are unable to say, I'm not going to buy a new textbook, because otherwise they will lose this access to this platform. So I think the real calculus of the undergraduate degree is this. Is 10% of my grade coming from the online homework platform? If so, I'll take the hit. If it's 35% of my grade that's coming from that, I'll have to take a different section. That's the calculus. Right? And then, of course, there's the question of e-textbooks. And I certainly think that a wolf in sheep's clothing. Right? Because this is the first thing that comes up. Those friendly faces, those publisher representatives, when they knock on my office door and I start the conversation about textbook affordability, they'll say, yes, yes, of course. This is precisely why we have soft cover versions, we have loose leaf binder versions of our textbook. They're much cheaper. And we have e-textbooks that come at maybe 60% of the cost of the regular book. E-textbooks. Students don't buy e-textbooks. They lease e-textbooks, right? They lease them. They have them for 6 months. They lose access at that point, which means they can't even resell that, which means that students who spend that money often end up spending more money than students who buy a physical book and have the ability to resell it at the end of the day. That's not the only problem. If you want to retake the course, if you fail, you want to get a better grade, you need to get it again. If you're interested in lifelong learning, too bad. Right? You've taken a course in anatomy and physiology, you plan to go on to medical school, you'd really like to use that book as a reference, not so much, you're going to lose that after 6 months. And then let's talk about accessibility and the problem of digital rights management, the problem that we're unloading onto university disability resource centers. We are subsidizing the work of commercial publishers by reformatting commercial books for students with, let's say, visual disabilities or other kinds of disabilities, right? But they can't copy-paste, they can't print, it's incredibly expensive. And when they reformat something, they can't easily share it with others because of the copyright. Right? There's a series of problems with all of this. And this is why I like to talk about open educational resources. Now, some of you may be familiar with OER, but even people who've been working with them for a while still misunderstand what they are. Just being free online digital resources doesn't make something an open educational resource. Right? Open educational resources can be print as well as digital. It's not just digital. There are things that are free, that are fully all rights reserved copyrighted. Right? I keep looking at you because I feel like you speak the same language over here. If you go to CNN.com, that's free, but it's certainly all rights reserved, copyrighted. So that's not OER. What makes something an open educational resource is are the permissions that go along with it. And the permissions are often summarized as the 5 R's. The most important for students, of course, is the ability to reuse. So free, unfettered reuse. You don't have to ask anybody permission. You don't have to write to them to say, hey, I want to use a chapter from your book. Is that? No, none of that. Free. But beyond free, for students, of course, you can do a lot more. So if you look at the bottom, retain and redistribute are incredibly important. So students get to keep it forever. They can even share it with their family, with their social networks, informally, legally. But for a faculty member, it's the 2 at the top that are most exciting to me. The ability to revise and remix. So I don't have to live with a textbook that is broken. I can make changes, I can adapt it, I can localize it, I can embed local examples and statistics. I don't have to say, don't read this chapter, I'll take it out. If something's missing, I'll write it in. If we're dealing with a bit of a replication crisis right now, if my textbook talks about behavioral priming, for example, I probably want to add a section in there, let's say. I can do that, right? So it's like this new layer of academic freedom for me personally. I don't have to bend my course onto the table of contents of a textbook. I can modify my instructional materials to suit my pedagogical goals, and that's powerful. So typically OER are assigned a Creative Commons license. And Creative Commons occupies a space that's in between all rights reserved copyright on the right and fully public domain materials on the left. Right? Somebody, an author, for example, I've put Creative Commons licenses onto my own work. I retain the copyright for my work. The difference is I'm choosing in advance how I am comfortable other people using my work. Am I comfortable with them using it for any purpose, including commercial purposes? That's up to me. I get to choose that. And it all boils down to those signs at the bottom. I know they look like a bit like hieroglyphics, but once you understand what those 4 symbols mean, you can decode any open educational resource. So on the far left, there's buy. which is simply attribution. This is like a referencing, right? So give credit to the person who created it. And almost every open educational resource you will encounter has by as one of the clauses, right? You're not going to pass this off as your own work. Some people choose to assign the second clause, right, which is NC non-commercial. You can use this for any purpose, but you're not going to sell it on Amazon for $5,000. You can make changes, you can do what you want, but you're not going to profit from this. SA, share alike. So again, you can take my open textbook in research methods in psychology, you can translate it into French if you want, no problem. But once you do that, you're going to share it back with the commons under an identical license. It's not just going to be you and your students that benefit from this. The commons is going to benefit from this. That's it. And the last one is very rarely used. In fact, technically it doesn't even make it OER. Equal. It means no derivatives. It means you can use this, but you can't make any changes. Now, in some cases, that's important. If you're talking about legal statutes or creative writing or photographers want their work in a particular way, that's fine. You can choose that. But once you see that, you know you're free to use this. OER could be images. And I'm showing you this image because if you've ever taken a course in art history, you'll know that those textbooks are among the most expensive because of the permissions involved. The Rijksmuseum in the Netherlands have openly licensed their masterworks. This is Vincent van Gogh's self-portrait. This is OER. Right? You could download a 300 megabyte version of this file. You could print a poster the size of this wall. You'd just be paying for the cost of printing. This is an open educational resource. You're already using it. Right? And this is not the only museum, by the way. The New York Metropolitan Museum of Art have done this with their collection. Dozens of museums have done this. Here's another example. If you use videos, if you use TED Talks in the context of your teaching, for example. I'm sure you're familiar with TED Talks by this point, right? These lovely, short, glib, bite-sized sort of solutions to complex problems. Not all of them are horrible. That can actually be the tagline. Not all of these videos are horrible. But these videos, if you look within the sort of screen over there, you'll see those hieroglyphics once again. This is OER. This is why you don't have to install some sort of a sketchy plugin for your Chrome browser to download the video, hoping that, oh my god, if this link goes dead, what will I do in the future? You can legally download and retain TED Talks, legally, with transcripts, with everything, because it's OER. No permission required. If you teach STEM, for example, go to the University of Colorado's website and use their interactive simulations for a variety of disciplines. Openly licensed, beautiful interactive simulations, all OER. If you teach English literature, there's no need to ask your students to spend $100 for an anthology when everything but the preface is in the public domain. Right? Tens of thousands of classics of English literature have been digitized thanks to Project Gutenberg. Students have access to this for free. This is OER. And then, of course, we can talk about textbooks. I work in BC, of course, and this year I've been seconded partly to BC Campus, which runs the Open Textbook Project for the province. And at this point, we have more than, well, we started with a mandate to create, adapt, or harvest open textbooks for the 40 highest enrolled courses in BC, which are really the 40 highest enrolled courses anywhere. First and second year survey courses, English, sociology, psych, math, physics, and so on. But now we have more than 220 textbooks in the collection. Many of them come with ancillary resources. They've been openly, transparently, peer-reviewed. You might see names of colleagues you know, you recognize, writing, describing their reviews of these books. Easy to find, easy to adapt as well. So this includes this book. This is an example of a book that I worked on. So you'll see this is the second Canadian edition of this Research Methods in Psychology textbook. This is a book that actually existed in the United States before. But as many of you will be aware, research ethics concerning work with human participants is quite different from the United States to Canada. We follow track council policies over here. There's a number of other things we wanted to address in terms of the Canadian context. So we made those changes. We also talked about the replication crisis in my discipline, the move to open science practices. All of those changes are reflected in that edition. And so that's with a colleague of mine, Ai-Chan Chiang, who's at Quest University, also in BC. What you'll see, though, this is very representative of one of the BC books. On the bottom right, you'll see it's available in a wide variety of digital formats. So all of that's free, right? So if your student wants to use a Kindle or a laptop or an iPad, their phone, it doesn't matter. You have access to all of that. But very much in print as well. And the beauty of the print is that with a traditional textbook, commercial textbook, it's about 80 cents on the dollar that goes back to the commercial publisher. Okay? So the 400-page research methods book, for example, professionally bound, is available to my students for $13. And when you sell it at that price, they buy it. Right? This is very powerful. They don't have to be forced into digital either. You don't have to rely on the fact that they necessarily have to have expensive technology to deal with ebooks. They can deal with print. Right. And there's a lot of research. At this point, there's about 13 peer-reviewed studies that have been published looking at the impact on educational outcomes of open textbook adoption. This is one of the largest studies. So you can see this is using a technique called propensity score matching. So when they're assigning students into courses that are using commercial versus open ed resources, for example, they're matching those groups on a variety of covariates to ensure there's no pre-existing differences. And what you're seeing is what you're finding across the board. In 13 out of 13 studies across different contexts, different disciplines, students assigned OER have lower withdrawal rates. They do better. In this case, more likely to pass the course with a C- or better, they even enroll in more courses. There's no study that shows the reverse. So usually they perform the same or better, which is astonishing. And this is where this rubric comes in. So David Wiley is one of the pioneers of the open education movement. And I love this rubric. I've just updated it a bit. On the y-axis, he has cost to students, which originally was $0 to $200, but I had to increase that to $400. And on the x-axis, you're seeing the percentage of students completing the course with a C or better. So being able to use it as a functional pass, you can use it as a prerequisite in the future, for example. And mad, glad, sad, rad are the 4 quadrants. So I've grayed out sad and glad because they're kind of boring. They're not interesting. Because if a student chooses not to buy a required course textbook, for example, and they do poorly, well, they're sad, but nobody's surprised. If they spend the money and they do well, they're glad, but nobody's surprised. That's what we expect or hope would happen. But consider the case of students at Mercy College in New York State, where they were taking a course in math. They were assigned a $187 math textbook, plus an additional fee for My Math Lab, called the platform that's used from Pearson. And in that case, 48% of students passed the course with a C or better. The next semester, same instructors, they switched to an open textbook for math and an online adaptive platform which cost students $5, which is open, called My Open Math. So they went from $190-ish to about $5. Now, 62% of the students were passing the course with a C or better. That's the magic of OER. It's that simple. This is what happened to me when I first started adopting open textbooks several years ago. These are some comments from the anonymous course evaluations at the end of the semester. You can see some of my students at the time loved that it was free, that they were saving money, that it was convenient, but I loved that comment in the middle. That's why I've blown that up a bit. I would not have bought the textbook for this course because it's an elective. I would have possibly walked away with a C. Now I might actually get an A-. I care about that. Right? Those are among the students I'm trying to reach. So at this point, this is me, although maybe in a couple of years. Because I don't, like many instructors, I don't always assign a textbook. I teach upper level courses on conservation psychology or the psychology of genocide, for which there is no textbook. So I'm very accustomed to putting together readings, resources, articles, leaning on fair reading as much as I can, although I have an eye on York right now. But at the same time, when I do, I certainly prefer that the textbook be open. There's a number of reasons for this. And now, of course, we can take this further. So what if we go beyond individual courses, individual sections that adopt OER? And what if we build an entire degree program where a student can complete the degree with 0 textbook costs? This is what the United States calls a Z degree. So this is something that was pioneered at Tidewater Community College in Virginia. They were the first to do it. As you can see, significantly decreased the cost to students, increased pedagogical flexibility, and it flourished. Among the impacts, this is at Tidewater. The drop rates went down, the withdrawal rates went down. Again, same story, percentage of students completing with a C or better went up. And that happened whether they were teaching the courses face-to-face or online. So this was proof of concept at Tidewater Community College. And this in turn has led a group called Achieving the Dream to fund the development of Z degrees at 38 other institutions in the United States. This has been happening. So now a 2-year degree, at least an associate's degree, can be completed in many, many states in the United States at zero cost. Which is why when BC Campus received some funding from the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation earlier this year, we put out a call. And we are now going to support the development and launch of Canada's first, we can't call them Z degrees, so we're going to call them Z credits. My institution is among the 3, as you will see. We're starting with a first-year program, just a flexible, foundational first-year certificate in arts. Similar thing is happening at Thompson Rivers University in Kamloops, Certificate of General Studies. But of course, the goal of there is to ramp up. So about a year and a half from now, we'll be building on that to go into 2-year programs and beyond. The third institution is the Justice Institute of BC, which focuses, of course, on law enforcement, among other things. But that's a 2-year program in development. So that's exciting, and that's on the horizon. So it's happening now in Canada as well. But having said all of this, I'm not sure how much time I've used. A fair bit of time. But I'd like to use maybe about 8-10 minutes more to broaden our discussion significantly. Because I'm still talking about resources, when the open education movement is also about practices. Right? It's not just about equitable access to knowledge, it is about equitable access to knowledge creation. So I want you to consider this picture, this illustration. This is actually an example of a public domain image, so it's certainly an open image. This comes from a 19th century French textbook that's describing the classroom of the future. It's actually the classroom of the year 2000. And it's quite funny if you look at it. The ideology that's sort of baked into that illustration. Who is the professor? Who are the students? Right? Professors feeding what appears to be received wisdom, at least whatever was significant enough to be published and bound, feeding them into some sort of electronic relay system that's magically delivering the information into the minds of students. There's no active learning, there's no collaboration, there's no peer assessment, there's no note-taking. It's just magically happening. And of course, you can see your teaching assistant over there doing all the mental labor. And it is funny to look at this, right? They really thought this was the classroom of the future. At the same time, I'm going to suggest that it's actually not that different from how most classes are run in higher ed today. This is really an illustration of what Paulo Freire described as the banking model of education. The banking model of education turns them, as in students, into containers to be filled by the teacher. The more completely she fills the receptacles, the better a teacher she is, he writes. The more meekly the receptacles permit themselves to be filled, the better students they are. Education thus becomes the act of depositing, in which the students are the depositories and the teacher is the depositor. In the banking concept of education, knowledge is a gift bestowed by those who consider themselves to be knowledgeable upon those whom they consider to know nothing. If you know Freire, this is not a surprise, but there's so much you can unpack in that. But this reminds me of what we're doing in the classroom every day, right? And I can talk about all of the ridiculous things we do. I know we've got a bunch of IDs in the room, right? So maybe we can talk about all of the wonderful aspects, advantages of using learning outcomes, the capabilities of deploying backwards course design, for example, the benefits of all of that. But I can also talk about how odd it is that I can tell my students, this is how your life is going to be different at the end of the course. I'm going to tell you what we're going to cover. I'm going to tell you what we're going to do. I'm going to tell you about all the things we're going to encounter, the skills you're going to build before I meet you. Because clearly, you're not going to shape the direction of this class. That's all. I could talk about the learning management system, right? Heavens. I find them fascinating. What do you use over here? Blackboard, Moodle? Moodle, yes. I love Moodle, right? It's open source, great. Well, what do? At the end of the semester, maybe we archive the course. Maybe we're going to reuse some of that customized layout, content, resources for the next semester. It's fine. But what's the one thing we scrape, we scrub? It's any trace of student activity. That's all. So I told you at the start of the semester that you're effectively meaningless in terms of the direction we're taking. Now I'm just confirming it. Everything you did was useless. This bothers me. Right? So when we talk about assessments, assignments, I'm going to suggest that they are effectively disposable. Most traditional assignments certainly are. Students will spend hours, if you assign them a research essay, right? They'll spend hours working on it for just one person to read their work. And we in turn will take workshops at CTL. How can we give really high quality formative feedback in a way that helps students? How can I phrase this so that they won't react poorly? You know what, 10% of your students will pick up the essay, 10% of that bunch will actually read the feedback instead of just the grade. So if you put together the hours that students are spending for just one person, and the hours that we are spending for basically no one, I'm going to suggest that traditional assignments are actively sucking energy out of the world. So instead, let's talk about what we could do. What if we asked our students, worked with our students, harness their energy, their potential, even their creativity, to have them produce resources for the commons? This is open pedagogy. The first example I'll give you is Wikipedia. Now I know, academia has a tense relationship with Wikipedia. We mistrust it. We tell it's like the 11th commandment of academia, isn't it? Like, thou shalt not cite Wikipedia. I know this. But it's odd. Again, who is better placed to address this public resource than academics, than scholars? No one. We are the best positioned to do it. We know Wikipedia is the first port of call for our students. We know that. We know that Wikipedia is often the first port of call for us. Is that too honest? I don't know if that's too honest. But yet we prohibit them from citing it. We're right when we think it's unreliable, by the way. In psychology, for example, there's about 9,000 articles on Wikipedia related to psych topics. About 2/3 of them have gone through Wikipedia's version of peer review, which is not your or my version of peer review. And about 10% of those articles are considered good articles by Wikipedia standards, which are not your or my standards. So if we're concerned, we're quite right to be concerned. At the same time, I think we're absurd to bury our heads in the sand and say, la 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 la, thou shalt not cite Wikipedia. No. We fixed this. And thousands of instructors are doing this. The Wiki Education Foundation has a suite of resources to help faculty and students, step-by-step guides for students, for faculty, rubrics, case examples, by discipline. They have a campus Wikipedia ambassador program. They could not be holding our hands anymore. Take the case of Amin Azam, who teaches in the medical school at the University of California. He and thousands of his students over several years have been editing, updating, improving articles for medical-related topics on Wikipedia. If you're going to be a general physician, ultimately you're going to have to explain complex medical information to a lay audience very quickly. This is a great way for them to practice. And they're improving the most widely used public resource for that. This is open pedagogy. Another example. At Brigham Young University, there was a cohort of graduate students who were taking a course in project management. And there was an open textbook for project management, but it was from business, so it wasn't relevant exactly. But they decided, all right, the example of the assignment over the semester is take out case examples from business, each of you write case examples for instructional design. They did that. And they recorded videos, and they added questions, and they added interactive features. They republished the book at the end of one semester, Project Management for Instructional Designers. It's been improved even more since then. The graduate students finished one course with the publication of a textbook. That textbook is now being used in many other places. That's open pedagogy. And it's not just graduate students. My friend Robin DeRosa teaches at Plymouth State University in New Hampshire. She teaches early American literature, so the readings, again, are in the public domain. But she thought, let me work with my students to select the readings that we will cover over the year. So even in terms of the curation, of the selection of readings that went into this open anthology was done by the students. They did more as well. We can talk about that later. At Ohio State University, students of environmental science have been writing bite-sized chapters that are now forming part of an open textbook for that discipline. It's edited, supervised by a board of faculty at Ohio State. This is renewable, purposeful work, meaningful work. It's to help future cohorts. At Simon Fraser University in Burnaby, students produced a 3-minute video about Cialdini's 6 Principles of Persuasion. They submitted it. They actually won first place, as you can see, in an international student award competition, video award competition. They won, what is it, 6,000 US, which is what, like 45,000 Canadian or something at this point? But more importantly, their video is now being used by faculty in Malaysia, in Hawaii, in Canada, to teach the science of persuasion. That's what's powerful about this. Or students at Kent State University, also in New Hampshire. Instead of asking them to write their 18th research essay, they're taking their budding social scientific knowledge, they picked a problem that's facing their local community or maybe of national concern, They're writing and submitting for publication op-ed pieces that are brief, engaging, and evidence-based. It's a terrific skill to lead the course with. Right? This is giving away your knowledge. It's got a much bigger purpose. Two more quick examples. This is another example of an open textbook that I worked on, but it's also an example of one of the books that doesn't come with the traditional bells and whistles that publishers send. Let's say a test bank would be the best example. And many faculty, again, dealing with very real pressures, will say, I really need a test bank before I'm willing to adopt this book. Now, I'm not one of those faculty, but it occurred to me at a certain point, why in heaven's name am I asking my students to answer questions? They can write them. How deeply do my students have to understand the concept to be able to write 3 plausible distractors for a multiple choice question? That's not an easy thing to do, but that's what we did. Just my small class of 35 students, 10 weeks over the semester, they start with scaffolded, right? And they write 1 distractor. A couple of weeks later, they're writing 2 distractors, then 3. 6 weeks in, they're writing the STEM, the right answer, and all 3 distractors. My small class of 35 students wrote 1,400 questions in 1 semester, peer reviewing them every week. It was about deeper learning, but they ended up creating a question bank that for other instructors is the critical resource they need to adopt the open textbook. You can do all of this. And the last example I'll give you is another one I deployed in my classes, where my students in my Psychology of Genocide class have been supporting the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum by tracing the histories of thousands of children who lived in the Lynch ghetto, reconstructing their biographies. These biographies are being vetted by the museum staff, but they will eventually form part of the online permanent archive of the museum itself. This is meaningful, authentic pedagogy. It's producing open resources at the same time. So, in many ways, even though I referred to traditional assignments slightly pejoratively as disposable assignments, maybe this is a better way to describe it. That if you think about assignments and assessments as a vehicle to transport our students, certainly in terms of skill development, where we know they are at the beginning of the semester to where we hope they will go by the end, traditional assignments are a lot like having an aircraft and choosing to drive it down the highway. Right? Because you could do that. People are going to look at you funny, but you could do that technically. But it's capable of so much more. And that's the whole point of this. With openness, with open education, we are talking about, or Robin and I have written about this, a public commons. We're talking about the democratization of education, yes. We're talking about access, but we're equally talking about agency. No question we're talking about access, including accessibility. But for faculty, agency includes being able to modify the resources to serve our pedagogical goals. For students, agency means choice, flexibility, not just of format, but in being able to participate in the knowledge creation process as well. Right? This is what openness is about. Some of you will be more familiar with the open access movement that's similarly trying to overcome a ridiculous situation that is normative practice, where we take publicly funded research, we supplement it with publicly funded voluntary peer labor and editorial work, and we say, here you go, Elsevier, here's a gift for you, because you need a few more $1 billion. This is normal. And then our university, the very university that has produced the research, has to pay a third time so that my colleagues can read what I've just produced, so we have to subscribe to the damn database. This is frustrating. This is normal. It's like the Matrix. It's very strange. Right? It's also normal in science, where we know what science is meant to be. We're meant to be working collaboratively together in a transparent way to advance knowledge. Yes, but that's not how it's set up. Right? If you fail to support your hypothesis, well, we've got the file draw problem. We have encouragement to publish in the least accessible channels, writing in the least accessible style. We have p-hacking and other questionable research practices that are absolutely common. This is not how science is supposed to work. And that's why the open science movement is so important, with pre-registering your hypotheses, with sharing your data openly, with sharing your research materials so other people can actually replicate your efforts. That's the whole point. Right? And of course, open access publishing. Open is a big dream. It's not a panacea, I should say. It has serious issues we need to look at. I think we need to be aware of things like digital redlining, making sure, for example, that our students are not forced to, or we're not expecting or assuming that our students have access to expensive devices to access digital content. We need to make sure we're not forgetting about accessibility when we talk about access. We need to embed inclusive and universal design when we're designing things. Not just so we're not systematically alienating a segment of our population, but so that we all benefit from taking a more inclusive approach. And we also need to look out for what's now being referred to as open washing, similar to greenwashing. It's commercial entities that are coming into the open space, using open in a way that sounds nice, but purely for marketing purposes, when they're actually continuing proprietary practices as well. So all of that's happening. But still, it represents, I think, an exciting future and something that's a reality where I work. In the spirit of openness, I'll leave you with one gift. I gave Kara a copy earlier. Earlier this year, we published, my colleague Robert Biswastina and I published that book, which is called Open. It's an introduction to open access, open science, and open education. We published it under a CC BY, which is an open license. So you can download it. You can, with a CC BY, you can translate it into Turkish and sell it for $5,000 on Amazon. Actually, I have no problem with that. You can do that. But please, if it's of interest to you, please download it. Feel free. It's entirely free, so you do not have to pay a cent for this. But you'll find chapters in that book from many of the leading scholars in those three movements. So I would certainly welcome you to do that. And I think we're about out of time. So I will stop there. But, no, I won't stop there. One last thing. This is actually the image that was lurking behind my title slide. I didn't talk about it, but I'll mention it briefly. Does anyone recognize what mountain that is? It's very famous. It's in the southern hemisphere.
Table Mountain.
Yes, Table Mountain in South Africa. So, I wanted to share this with you because I took this photograph about 1.5 years ago, and we're looking at Cape Town with Table Mountain above it. But what may not be evident is I'm standing at the edge of Robben Island. Robben Island was originally a leper colony before it was converted into a maximum security prison for political prisoners. So this is where, among others, Nelson Mandela spent 18 years out of his 27-year prison sentence. If you have the chance to visit Robben Island, I recommend it more than most things, especially because today all of the guides are former inmates of the prison. So when I visited, you're able to talk to them, speak to them, really ask them about how they managed to maintain hope in the spite of such visible injustice, sort of small acts of daily resistance, what they managed to do. But in many ways, when I think about that experience and the transformational educational experience that was, it is because I think education at its finest is open, it's accessible, it is authentic, it is decolonized, it is anti-racist, it is open. So I will definitely stop there. And I know we're kind of out of time, but in case you're interested, in a couple of hours I will tweet out a link to my slides. So if you want to repurpose any of my slides, I will openly license them, and then you can use it for whatever purpose you want. But thank you for taking the time to be here. And I know we're up against 10 o'clock, but I'm hoping you can stay for a few minutes and we can have a little bit of a Q&A.